there does need to be a shift on the continent away from the cancerous effects of France. France has been a huge cancer, and I think we need to better study and also think about what do we do with Francophone Africa. And yeah, I think of places like what happened in not Abidjan, but in Cote d'Ivoire. The fact that they are literally, that's one of the last strong points for France. They will fight hell to make sure that they keep it. But we need to ask the question, how long can this be? Especially as the French state is in total crisis as we speak. So maybe that's a chance and opportunity, because really we can't look, it's not a language thing. I mean, those who like French can like French, but it's a mentality thing. And it's not to say because we're Anglophone, it's better, but it's rather to say we need to find a common language of understanding on the continent, which again, I'm saying it's not a language thing. You can keep your language, but a common language of development. And we can't, as things currently stand, it's not healthy to have Francophone countries the way they are. It's a danger for themselves. It's also a danger for the rest of the continent.
We can't get away from the fact that our influence is Anglophone. The British, that conceptualization of the British state is how we view ourselves.
Yes.
Right. So I found it when I asked the students from Francophone countries, they're like, nope, we view the state in two totally different ways. It would seem, as he said, it would seem you guys who come from this Anglophone understanding of the state, you are fine with the friction of what the state can and cannot do. In Francophone, we expect the state to do everything without question, and we follow without question. The colonial, the French understanding of what the state looks like, they still revere the French state, the current modern French state. So what happens in Paris must happen in Abidjan, must happen in Yaoundé. And it made me think what you're saying is quite true, to say this quasi, we've not moved. We're just simply satellite states.
This episode frames 2026 as a period of political creative destruction, where institutional decay has become structural. It examines Africa's strategic drift through the weakening leadership of anchor states such as South Africa and Nigeria, the shift from resource extraction to bargaining over critical minerals, and the growing primacy of statecraft over ideology. It also explores how AI-driven financialization, stability without renewal, and upcoming local elections signal emerging political realignments amid rising global certainty. My guest is Professor TK Pooe. Professor TK Pooe is an associate professor of statecraft and policy at the African School of Governance in Kigali, Rwanda. He's also a former dean of student affairs at the same School of Governance in Kigali. He's a visiting associate professor of political science and governance at the Wits School of Governance in South Africa. The Solomon Atah Podcast starts right now. Welcome and thank you for being on the podcast, Prof.
Marafu, and good morning, as we say here in lovely Kigali, Solomon, and thanks for having me.
Fantastic. So, do you have more words in the local language? Because I would really like to hear how they sound, and our audience as well.
It's Nakuza Neza, which means morning and how are you? Sometimes afternoon and how are you? And the rest I am learning as I walk the streets every day.
So how is Kigali in terms of your work? What are you finding to be exciting that sometimes you chuckle over a coffee and chat to colleagues about?
Well, I think the key thing here is just to be in a place that prioritizes the future. I think everybody knows about the genocide. And I find it, for me, work-wise, as a person who looks at policy and statecraft, how they've been able to use their past to shape what they want for a better future. And just, I mean, it's a country of, one thing that hits you is so many young people in positions of key influence. So that's one thing that I enjoy. You see young bankers, the hunger to get better. That's the one thing I like about being here. And like I said, with the work, a friend of mine who's at UCT, Dr. David Fadaran, when we were discussing me coming this side, he said, it's actually nice to be in an African country where the news is positive. Because a lot of times we can't deny that the continent is not where we ideally want it to be. But here they seem to have found something which works for them. Is it perfect? No. But what I like is they admit it's not perfect and they want to get better. it's just nice to be in an environment which challenges you when things are working to ask, can this be done back home in South Africa? How would this work for the region? Because the other thing about being in Rwanda and East Africa is I think they've really got integration well. They've done it well from an economic perspective, and because I think you see it economically, the rest of the citizens then buy into it. So
I see.
Yeah, it's challenging me. I always say, look, you never stop studying. One is here to basically progress in my learning of the continent to see how can I be better and what am I not understanding. So yeah, that's my experience.
Great.
But as a country, beautiful, very beautiful.
Awesome stuff. And there's two questions that have just come to my mind. I spoke to an academic. Their episode is coming up, episode 16 and 17, who talks to me about the car-free day in Kigali. Have you taken part, Prof?
Yes, I'm an advocate. I'm working. I only use my 2 series, my 2 feet to get around.
Yeah, okay.
And it's a good initiative because it also kind of just speaks to where they want to go. Because what you also notice about the cars they use, a lot of them are hybrids. Even the scooters are hybrids, which says they are really getting into how do you get to the future. The idea of car-free day also kind of makes the government also note and see how they can improve on public infrastructure and public transport.
Yeah.
Because for you to make citizens say, listen, Atah, please leave your very lovely car to get to either walk or to get into public transport, Atah's going to say it needs to be there and it needs to work. So I do enjoy it, but it's also coupled with the cleaning, the cleaning at the end of the month.
I see.
Yeah, so
great. Everyone gets involved with the cleaning, I take it. Yeah.
You have to. It's your country. That's what I like about them here is it's their country. Yes. And they say it's our ownership. So I love that about it. Yeah.
So another one, I spoke to another academic who talked about African Continental Free Trade Act, and you've talked about integration, the economic integration from Rwanda. Can you just share some thoughts then, just a little bit before we get into you talking to me about scenario planning and statecraft in the 21st century?
Well, the key issue, of integration is it's a necessity it's a landlocked country. So it's one of the things which was a bit odd. I always laugh at my colleagues here in Rwanda to say, coming from South Africa, we've got oceans on both sides. It's a weird, it's very strange. And then you actually see the value, and it almost goes back to, like the Abuja Treaty, the Lagos Plan of Action, which, look, to their credit, they did say, listen, Africa cannot progress unless we really think how do we get around the landlocked thing. And the landlocked thing works with integration. But where I think SADC, we've not quite got it right, is to say it's an admission, and this is where East Africa is a bit different, that most of the countries in East Africa, bar a few, owing to the political situation, they are on the right economic trajectory. So it's easy to sell integration when all of us are moving in the right direction, as opposed to SADC, where, look, SADC is in its worst period and people do act up owing to that, the issue of people. And also what I did note about East Africa is there's elite integration. Elites marry among families here. It's very normal to have your brother, Atah, who is in Kenya, whose mother and uncle is a member of parliament in another East African country. So when the elites have got integration or they've intermarried, it's very easy to sell it to the population, to say, oh, but wait, it's not a abnormal thing. We all are part of it. And I think that's where in SADC, ECOWAS has its own issues at the moment owing to the Sahel states. But I think East Africa, for me, it's more the issue that it's the elites have brought into it, and it's normal for them. And that's why you can't really go fight your brother now, can you? Because it comes from another mother. That's the thing. It's really made me think of, oh, wow, maybe we've not, integration in the SADC it's on paper. It's a very technical thing, but it's made me think that, look, we need to probably have a bit more of an open discussion about, one, the countries need to all be in the trajectory which is positive. If you look at Kenya, you look at Rwanda, look, even though Ethiopia is not part of what's termed part of the East African bloc, they are seen and are treated as such. And then you kind of see Tanzania with all its troubles, but the economies are all heading in the right direction. The
Great
indicators
stuff.
are positive.
This is great news,
then,
Prof.
yeah. So it's a positive. Yeah.
You know, when you while you're on that, before we get into you defining statecraft, because I was thinking whether does statecraft mean Machiavellian, but I want to hear it from because when you, in terms of your research around scenario planning, integration is really like, is integration like a way that scenario planning happens?
It's I'll put it this way. The statecraft, the basic idea, and one of the key people on the continent that really spoke to this was people like the late Thandeka Makandewera from Malawi, brilliant economist.
Okay.
And there's also a South African, he's a diplomat at the moment, Professor Zukisi Tobo, who used to be my boss at the Wits School of Governance, but he's now the ambassador for South Africa at the World Trade Organization.
Okay.
And the key idea of statecraft is to say, and the name, we'll take it from the idea of a craft. If you think of either a farmer or somebody who's creating something,
yes,
it's the basic idea that the state does not happen in a vacuum. The state needs to plan. The state needs to consider, tally up the numbers.
Yeah.
It speaks about the budget. The state needs to say, how do we act? This is where policy comes in. Do we have the right institutions? So when one says my title being Professor of Statecraft, it's asked a simple question to say, especially for the continent, do we have the right budget, institutions, and place to get us to where we want to go to? And this is where the scenario, or what's now we term anticipatory governance, comes in, which is to say, everybody says we need to be going somewhere, but have we actually decided to say what is the somewhere? Because it's going to look different for each and every country, right? Nigeria, by virtue of its size and by virtue of its economy, is going to look very different to, let's say, to what's happening maybe in Burkina Faso.
Yeah.
So statecraft says, listen, with what the resources you have there, and looking at anticipatory governance, let's not think in terms of election to election, 5 years to 5 years.
Election cycles.
Let's actually say what are we thinking about in the next 30 to 50 years? Because when it's 30 to 50 years, and one of my mentors, Marius Ustays, and he always used to say, it's easier to speak about the future because the future is neutral. You don't own it, I don't own it, but we can own it, and we can plan for it. So that's what statecraft says. Yeah. So it says, how do we really quite get our states to start thinking in the long term, to start saying what is most likely to happen? But most importantly, and this is a part where I know people sometimes say scenarios is imaginary, because I always have this argument with my students to say, but no, you're speaking imaginary things. No, the future starts now. You don't wait for it. Statecraft is not saying, look, we'll wait for a designated year for 2030 or 2063. It says you've picked the date, you've picked the year, you've picked what you want to do. Now almost do reverse engineering and ask the question, how do you get there starting now?
Absolutely. So in fact, from what you're explaining around statecraft is like something like state design. Like it's almost like every aspect of a nation state needs to be designed. Everyone needs to know exactly what the movement from A to Z or from A to B, from B to C is. It cannot just be conjured up via a political rally, but everyone has to know, and you have to take the citizens with you. But let me let me come back to this question to say, you have framed 2026 as a moment of political creative destruction, where institutions are weakening faster than replacement can emerge. What signals tells you that this is no longer temporary disruption, but a structural condition of global politics?
No, Solomon, thank you so much for that. And maybe a good place to start is just because those who have done economics would know the idea of creative destruction, which is obviously Schumpeter's idea. And I always use this illustration to say, you look like a very young person, so this might not apply to you. But back in the day, there were these heavy computers which we used to lug around, So from the computer to where we are at the moment, where everything is in your cell phone, that speaks about it's creative destruction. And what Schumpeter said is, you will find that new technology comes to the fore and destroys the previous one. If you think about the vinyl to the CD, from the CD to the USB, now we've gone from the USB to the cloud. So it's that destruction. So I put it together and say, why can it not be the same to understand what's happening with our politics at the moment? And the reason I put it in that way is to say, if we think about 2026, we have to go back to what's happened over the few years, right? If you remember when President Trump first had his, let's say, his taste with being president, people thought it was a once-off. But what people missed out is before President Trump took over, there was Brexit. So it was Brexit, President Trump. And then what we started to see on the African continent was, people started to really ask the key question to say, listen, for the longest time, we've been told liberal democracy is the way to go. Yeah. But we started now to notice the Sahel region. And it was not as though people, and again, it wasn't a once-off, because on the continent, we've had a lot of military coups.
Yes.
But what was a bit different about these ones was, if you notice, the population was not up in arms. The population was welcoming of people like Captain Traore.
Yes.
In the beginning, so that made me think, what makes this so different?
Yes.
And I said, okay, maybe I can park the Sahel region. Then we looked at what happened in places like SADC, South Africa. The ANC, everybody knew the ANC was in decline. It was not a debate. But the manner of the decline, it's a decline which everybody sees it, they know it, but they cannot stop it. So it says it's something which you cannot control.
Yeah.
And then obviously if you look at ZANU-PF, if you look at what happened in Mozambique, these declines are happening such that we have to call it's a trend. So now we get into 2026. Now the trend, if you believe what I'm saying, or the hypothesis I'm putting forward, is the trend is established, which is to say we live in an era where no one can tell you for certainty how the economy is going to go. We are told there's AI, there's many new things. So it's one thing we are in a status saying we know there's a new economy being built. We just happen to use AI to put it. But most importantly, we know politically, globally, on the continent or globally, things are moving in such a way that Trump is when he came in the first time, one could have said it's a once-off. The fact that he got elected a second time, and look at the actions he's taken. His actions, the European Union is they don't know what to do, because their institutions are not able to react to what's happening. So this cycle of creative destruction simply speaks about, it's my way of trying to understand that the changes we are noticing and seeing are happening at such a pace, and we can all agree to it. I'm just putting a name to it to say, for me, it's a process of political creative destruction where institutions and old ideologies are being challenged, and there's nothing which is coming to the fore. But the key thing about creative destruction, like Schumpeter put it in an economic term, is we know we're going towards something new is going to pop up. We just don't know what it's going to be called and what it's going to be.
Great stuff. I think you've really opened it up quite a bit, but I still want you to stay on it because I want you to look at this follow-up question. How does that apply to, or let me put it like this, based on what you have researched so far, which countries have made measurable progress and which countries have not, judging from your direct engagement with them and their adoption or implementation of your research recommendations? So now that you are looking at all of this, who is talking to you nicely and who isn't?
Well, the lovely thing is, and I like the way you framed it, because it will also take us back to what you said about the 2026 trends, because one of the things I put there is ASEAN states, which is your East Asian countries.
Yes.
They have really been able to do statecraft well. When you think of a country like Singapore, obviously China is China. We just assume
it's a phenomenon on its own.
It's a phenomenon by itself. But look at places like Singapore. You look at places like Indonesia. It's not to say they don't have challenges, but what you said is what have they done nicely? And what they've done nicely is they almost work with the chaos. They're not immune to it. They just work with it better. For instance, if you listen to the new prime minister of Singapore, when Trump came in with his tariffs, he's like, look, he said what Kanye said. I think Prime Minister Kanye in Canada said, which is, look, the old ways are finished. We now live in this new era. But the way in which they've been able to orientate the government, but this started a long time ago. They said integration, regional economic integration. Because what East Asian countries do is, look, they respect that each country, we have to understand, nation states now exist. We don't have to like the idea, we know where it comes from, but what East Asian countries have done is they said, listen, my citizen has to be comfortable in their identity in their state, But what we can then do, maybe to open up the horizon, is to say, how do we trade with our neighbors in such a way that the other neighbor is no longer a scary it's not a scary neighbor. And what Asian countries, if you look at the economies over the last 5 to 7 years, it's almost as though they would have been preparing for this moment. But they might not have said Trump is coming, but they knew that, listen, we have to change how we do things and we have to do it quicker. So countries that I think really speak to what I work in terms of statecraft and anticipatory governance and scenarios is definitely East Asian countries. You will note that the Singapore government, in the Prime Minister's office, there is a whole office termed anticipatory and scenario planning, which works hand in hand in the office of the Prime Minister. In the Prime Minister's office.
Where decisions are actually made or something,
Yeah, long term. They have every year, and I think it's been running for as long as the state, probably 50 years, the state will take a census. It's almost like a survey to check sensitive issues. For instance, how do you feel about the rate of divorce? How do you feel about children? How do you feel about education? So the Singapore government always knows what the citizens are thinking, such that when it comes to the policy proposal, the citizens are not shocked. They're like, oh, well, they actually heard us.
Yeah.
So the thing is, one of the ways I'm thinking about this, it's not a clear idea, is when you get ready for political creative destruction, when you get ready for anticipatory governance and statecraft, you have to speak to your own citizens, because you can't be a person who's so ahead of your citizens that they feel as though they're catching up and they're going to feel as though Solomon is too far removed from us. He's not part of us. But you can't be so far behind that citizens feel as though, how can you lead me when you don't even understand the future? So they do it quite well. And it also sort of works out in Rwanda, where they are very big on statecraft. One of the key things I'm learning here is Rwanda's, if you look at the budget, its main budgetary concerns, they've made a bet. The bet is this simple. They're building a new airport, which is going to rival Addis. They want to be the financial hub of East Africa, which means they want to be able to say, because Kenya is seen as East Africa's.
Let's enjoy that for a while.
For a while. But the thing is, when I said there comes a point where citizens need to feel the fruits of your planning. If you speak to Kenyans, like South Africans, like Nigerians, there's a frustration about the future. Even though their trajectory is positive, their politics is holding them back. So and this is to say, Rwanda is not trying to say we're going to take from Kenya. They're simply saying, let's create an environment that puts us as a financial hub. So what do? You make a bet. And one of the bets they put on is to say, part of it is to bring people to understand Rwanda, which is tourism. But the current airport is small. So what do? You put your money where your mouth is. You take a bet. And what's a bet? It's the airport and it's the airline. To say, when these two things work, when people see that, listen, the stability, you can actually come here, put your money. Then the next question you ask is to say, if I can put my money here, it means I can set my bank up. If I can set my bank up, it means I can set up insurance. And then the next question is, if there's a stability and level, it means I can actually start putting in ICT infrastructure such that we can become a financial services hub, which is what Singapore, which is what East Asian countries have done. And also some of the Emirate countries. You think about your Qatar, now Saudi, after one might say being in a status of sleep for the longest time, are beginning to wake up to this idea. So when you ask me countries which are doing it well, on the continent, look, you can't ignore what Rwanda, what Ethiopia is doing. They, I think, probably are ahead of the curve in terms of what they're doing. But I think a lot of it comes from East Asia and some of these Emirate countries like Qatar. They are the ones who are really practicing statecraft and anticipatory governance to what I could say world leading levels.
You argue that Africa's challenge is not a lack of resources, but the drift of what you've called anchor states, which is Nigeria and South Africa. What has fundamentally gone wrong with these leadership roles of South Africa and Nigeria, and what could credible regional doctrine actually looks like?
No, thank you for that one. And the idea of anchor states is not new for most people who follow the continent, but I think I take it from Professor, Vusi Kumero, who's now I think he's the DVC at the Durban University of Technology, and Professor Samuel Olatoroba at Carleton University in Canada. Their paper said, look, the continent, we cannot move forward without regional champions or anchors.
Yes.
And if you look at where the two big beasts. Namely, Nigeria and South Africa are. If you look at the financial services, the economies are diversified enough that they should be, and we cannot argue they're two leading regional anchors in their both respective areas. But these two states are in just terminal leadership decline. If you look at the state of SADC, if you look at the economy and the politics, South Africa is a non-factor in SADC. If anything, if you speak to people in SADC, their argument is SADC is poor because South Africa refuses to lead. I know some people might say, but no, we don't want to. We're not looking for new colonial states. It's not about colonialism. It's about the idea of saying, when you have been given, it's a biblical concept. When you have been given, you need to give back. For instance, if you look at South Africa's private sector, which is sitting on huge reserves of money, that money should be used to say, listen, how do we put infrastructure in SADC? We're talking about ICT, trains, airports. You need money from somewhere. You don't always have to go to the World Bank. South Africa's economy and its private sector has enough money to say that, listen, if they were investing and if there were proper economic plans in place, you wouldn't need to Zimbabwe doesn't need to go to the Chinese. They don't need to go ask for those loans. Mozambique doesn't have to go through what it's going through, because if you had incentivized the private sector in South Africa to be able to say, listen, we as government guarantee we will be behind you, sometimes militarily, but also just in terms of politically and statecraft, to say, listen, X-Bank, go make heavy investments into gas power in Mozambique, because we will benefit from that energy, but the Mozambicans will also do that. But what I'm saying, you would agree, is not what you hear when you speak about SADC. When you speak about SADC, you just keep hearing about the terminal decline of the liberation movement and South Africa navel gazing. The idea that all South Africa does is speak about what has the ANC done? What has the coalition done? There's no conceptualization of where the region is at the moment. Same thing with Nigeria. President Tinubu comes in. President Tinubu, and when you speak to a lot of Nigerians, the utter shock on their face that he could not handle the Sahel region, the rise of the Sahel region, or what is now that coalition in the Sahel. Yes. His reaction was suspend them from ECOWAS, which, and I always do I can always show people the counterfactual example. Think about what happened. I think it was Guinea, one of the Guineas, when President, I think it was President Oliver Sanjo was president of Nigeria. There was a military coup. The president of other Guinea-Bissau simply came to Nigeria, said, listen, President Oliver Sanjo, there is a problem. This military coup has happened. President Oliver Sanjo took the deposed president, took him on the Nigerian presidential plane, landed in Guinea. And a message was sent to the general. You made a mistake. I think you didn't mean to dispose of your president. We are giving you a few hours to rectify this mistake. And within the few hours, the military general said, yes, you're right, President Oliver Sanjo. We had made a mistake. This was not the intention. There was some tension, which we firmly did not understand. The president was put back in. That was Nigeria at its height. Nothing happened in ECOWAS without Nigeria given its blessings. Now, President Tinubu comes in. His response has been, let's suspend. Let's not discuss what's happening with the leaders in Mali, what's happening in Burkina Faso. Let's suspend them from ECOWAS. What do they then do? Okay, look, we'll make our own little regional integration army here. Yes, you've locked us away from your ports. We'll now take things through Morocco. And we don't simply need you. And moreover, if you look at the Nigerian, what does he do? He puts Nigeria in a very compromised situation. When Nigeria is now seen as now the platform from which the United States, the French, are now going to be attacking the Sahel region leadership. Now, tell me, where is leadership? How can you be an anchor state when even your own citizens are looking at you saying, but why are you against what might be termed the righteous coup d'etats that were happening in the Sahel regions, owing to the fact that the French are still a cancer? And I always say, when you say France, you must always say France is a cancer on the continent. How can you as Nigeria acquiesce to this understanding that you are simply going with the French? It makes no sense at all. So your own citizens don't believe you. You've made the wrong decision in suspending them from ECOWAS. What power do you have? And that's when I say the weak anchor states, this weakness in Nigeria and South Africa is and has made the continent weaker, because both states are not thinking about the region. They're thinking about their own self-interest and their own elite self-interest and nothing about the continent. And until these two anchor states wake up, in the form of when we had President Obasanjo, President Mbeki, and also President Wade from Senegal. What we are going to find is Africa is not going to move forward. Now, some people might say, but look, Africa is not Nigeria and South Africa. Very true. But if we're talking about the rands or nairas and pounds and dollars, South Africa and Nigeria are African. And to have them at the weakest means that we're not thinking about statecraft, we're not thinking about political development. If you know what I'm saying, I'm not saying that they should be taking over or being colonialist. I'm simply saying there's a duty when you're as rich as these countries and have got their infrastructure. You need to share it with the region such that they are all able to come up. Because at the end of the day, SADC is what I'm more comfortable with. South Africa has a 60 million population. We don't move the dial. We don't move the needle. That's a little city in China. But South Africa, which is connected to the rest of SADC, now you're speaking about close to 300 million people. That's a market. And if you're not understanding the issue of being an anchor state, it's not about liking or disliking. Look, we don't have to like each other, but our economies say to us that if we work as markets, if Nigeria, which is a market by itself, now integrates and really ensures that the rest of West Africa is moving in the right direction, our companies can only make the right profit. Our citizens can only get richer. But you need vision, and unfortunately, our anchor states lack that at the moment.
There are two things in your very profound analysis, Prof. I spoke to another academic on this podcast who says the following. He says that he spoke about universal health insurance. And he says that the bigger the market, exactly what you are saying, the more everyone in that market can have universal insurance. Because if you are a smaller market, smaller population, if that is a correct word, then it's very difficult for the government to afford universal health coverage for everyone. So it's exactly the same thing that as a continent, these anchor states need to play the major role of ensuring integration. But again, players like Ethiopia and your Rwanda are coming up. Is there a vacuum? Are we looking at a vacuum here, or are we looking at additional integration if these two anchor states were to play their roles effectively?
And I love the way you frame it, because in short, in the era of political creative destruction, remember, it waits for no man or no woman. So what you've described about Ethiopia and Rwanda is to say, what is that saying? Nature abhors a vacuum. If there's a vacuum, Rwanda and Ethiopia will come to the fore. But the key question will be, because they'll also face a limitation at the end of the day, to say, look, they might do it well for East Africa. But this now becomes a question to say it's the economies of scale.
I see.
And also what makes Nigeria and South Africa unique, we're coastal. Now, Ethiopia, for all its, and it is on a great run, but you note what the government is doing. They've been fighting to get a port. If it means creating war in certain areas of the Horn of East Africa, so be it. So they are landlocked. So you're right in saying, look, maybe in the foreseeable future, in the absence of South Africa and Nigeria stepping up, Ethiopia and Rwanda will come up. But it will always be a question of, like you said, to what degree? Because if you look at where the major population is, and if you look at where the money is, at the end of the day, it's in West Africa and it's in Southern Africa. So we must welcome and we must say good on Rwanda and Ethiopia for coming to the fore. But that only speaks about a region, which is the East.
Yeah.
If the West and Southern Africa are in the state of moribus that we're in, it will be sad, because then our citizens will correctly ask, if a little country like Rwanda, and it is little, make no mistake, it's a small place, but the impact is outsized.
Absolutely.
If nothing else, the egos of South Africans and Nigerians needs to come to the
bruised. Okay, Prof, let me put this question to you. The shift from raw resource extraction to hard bargaining over critical raw materials is central to your analysis. How should African states think differently about power, contracts, and industrial sovereignty in the new scramble?
I'm going to from now on, I'm going to reference your point, industrial sovereignty. So if you don't mind, you've come up with it. I'm going to run with it from now on. I like it a lot. Look, again, this is where history becomes important. The continent has never lacked resources. It's established fact. But what this era should show you, and if you look at the example of Greenland and President Trump, President Trump, he probably never stepped foot in Greenland again. But his ultimate argument was to say we need to control it. Because in the era we're living in, where technology is central towards a lot of these critical raw minerals, and they're not really critical raw minerals, they're on the elemental state. It's only critical because they play a part in the new economy. Hence they use the title critical raw minerals. Is we can't do the mistakes we did in the past. Africa, think about Nigeria and oil. Oil is supposed to be a blessing. Middle East countries or the Emirates
they've shown that
oil and gas, it's supposed to be a blessing. But if you look at the state of oil production and what it's done on the continent, it's been a disaster. I think it's a Guinea-Bissau, same thing. It's not really benefited citizens. So the reason I say your term of it needs to be industrial sovereignty is we can't get into the mistake we've made when we look at oil, where we're like, oh, our potential is in these critical raw minerals. And then we get excited and then we say, oh, but look, when these Western countries and private sectors want to come sign, this is progress. No, that's not progress. We've had these resources. What is progress is to make the contract say, listen, we have no problem.
Yes.
We are very much about exportation. No problem. But we need to export finished products, where we need to see factories in our countries. These factories need to address our issues of unemployment. Because if we do what we've been doing, which is to say, we send you the product, i.e. Nigeria sends out crude oil as raw as it is, and then it comes back into the country and you need to buy, we have failed. So so the contracts need to be different in this era. We cannot be taken by the idea of critical raw. Also, we cannot be so married to this idea of critical raw minerals being the savior, because Africa, sometimes our governments treat these things as saviors that will save us. Look, the resource of a country is not what's in the ground, it's what's in the minds of the people.
Thank you.
So, and this is where I think we have got it wrong. So we need to tie, even if we make a deal which says, listen, okay, look, if you want to take it out, let's put a premium on the price, but let's make sure we invest in early childhood development. Let's make sure that, look, one of the critiques, I didn't quite touch on it. Look, not every African needs to go to university and study social science. Sometimes we need to say, let's create institutions which help us to, what's the university of technicons, polytechnicons, I think in other countries.
Yeah, polytechs,
Let's make sure we can create things. This, because the idea that all of us need to go be studying social science has its place. But if you note in other countries, it's only done by a few for a reason. Because at the end of the day, look, while one is creating I'd like to think some value, at the end of the day, what we really need is hard currency to be able to say, listen, Solomon's friends have got a factory. This factory is creating something for the world. But for that to happen, we need to make sure that Solomon has a workforce that is able to create these things. So when I say we need to rethink even the idea of education, which means we need to move back. And for us to move back, it means we're going to need a lot of hard currency to say, what should the education system for the continent look like for the next 50 years? And you might find that we're going to need to do a lot of reinvestment. We're going to need to reteach our teachers in terms of what they do. When we say maths and science, great. But what we're talking about is applied maths and science. Your ability to be able to quickly say, listen, how do I create an app? How do I create this? How do I make sure that it's about telecommunication? So that requires a lot of reinvestment into our economies. That's why I say the issue is not these resources. That's a secondary issue. The issue is, what are we going to do such that we can really build up our human capital? And when I say human capital, that's the game of the future. The future is not in what we dig up. What we dig up should be secondary. Because I always make the point with my students, we're not kids of a lesser God. Africans, when they're in the right environment, we thrive. That is why we can go to the US, to the UK, and we see the diaspora thrive.
So beyond imagine. Thrived, with flying colors. Take over, actually.
They take over. So the issue is not an intellectual incapacity. The issue is we need to make the continent an environment where human capital flourishes. So, but for that, we need to view these resources, critical raw minerals, not as the panacea, but as simply another tool in us making sure that we have the right environment so that we can thrive.
From your research, you suggest that statecraft, and you've already been on this quite a bit, statecraft, not ideology, now determines influence in Africa, especially when comparing China, Russia, and the UAE and the US. Why have African elites struggled to respond with integrated strategies of their own? Is it the colonial influence or the quasi-independence, something that I've described elsewhere, that are we really independent? Hence, I started to abandon the word independent and start approaching the word sovereignty.
No, I think you frame it quite well. Oddly enough, we had a discussion with students from Francophone countries on the continent.
Yeah,
because
that would be interesting.
Yeah, because I want to say, look, as a South African, I think also a lot of Nigerians and Ghanaians, we can't. I don't think it's a conversation we have a lot. We can't get away from the fact that our influence is Anglophone. The British, that conceptualization of the British state is how we view ourselves.
Yes.
Right. So I found it when I asked the students from Francophone countries, they're like, nope, we view the state in two totally different ways. It would seem, as he said, it would seem you guys who come from this Anglophone understanding of the state, you are fine with the friction of what the state can and cannot do. In Francophone, we expect the state to do everything without question, and we follow without question. The colonial, the French understanding of what the state looks like, they still revere the French state, the current modern French state. So what happens in Paris must happen in Abidjan, must happen in Yaoundé. And it made me think what you're saying is quite true, to say this quasi, we've not moved. We're just simply satellite states of what's happening. Now, when I say statecraft of the Russians and the Chinese in the UAE, you would know two of the big players on the continent. Trump, his vision, America Vision 2025 or 2024, I always get it wrong. But they said something quite profound in a statement when they were discussing Africa. I think we only come up about 4 or 5 times in their vision. He said, look, this idea that we go and tell them that, listen, who you must marry, who is a male, who's a female, what's homosexuality, he said that's rubbish. We're not here for that. What the American needs to be doing on the continent, we're here for commerce, and that's it. Hence, you see the Americans, they're no longer moved. They had no problems closing US ID, which we should welcome, because there's something very wrong when you as a country put US ID in your line item as a budget.
As a budget,
it means you have not thought about how to really create a budget for your people. And it's never your budget. And we also cannot get away from the US ID they were not doing charity. They were used to destabilize lots of governments on the continent. So when people were decrying, oh, USAID and these NGOs, I was celebrating, saying, it's good. We must be happy that they are leaving. But the question of the vacuum is the problem at the moment. I'm not saying that there were not ill effects. The fact that there was some health, like in South Africa with HIV and AIDS. But the key question at hand was, how did you allow yourself to get to the point where USAID becomes part of your line item? That is wickedness, and that shows that you had no right to be leading people on the continent. Because if USAID is what makes your budget as an African country, you should be ashamed of yourself, because it means you've done nothing for your people to raise the economy. The budget needs to come from you. The budget gives you sovereignty as a country. Yes. So, but to return to what the Russians are doing, what are the Russians doing? The Russians, and this is where I say the issue of ideology. Now, Russia is a very, look, they are very cold in terms of how they do statecraft, but they are very calculated. They're rigid. But note how many African countries, South Africa, the Russians, we were in liberation with them. Ideology. We run for ideology. Socialism. Yes, this is where socialist Marx. No. The Russians don't do ideology. The Russians do commerce. The UAE, the damage that they're doing in places such as Southern Sudan. It's not about, they don't even care about whether you're Muslim or not. It's simply about commerce. The UAE wanted to expand the influence from the Arab states. They're in competition now with Saudi Arabia. What do you do when you now get into competition? You increase your ambit. Africa now becomes your new playground. But note how we note it. Our governments will view this as a ideological debate. It's not an ideological debate. It's about statecraft. These countries are not here for charity. They want something. They were going to get it. They're going to influence it. So when I was saying it's not about ideology, it's simply saying our governments need to mature to the level of stop thinking things in terms of ideology. No one is in the Cold War. No one wants to be a socialist. No one wants to be a capitalist. What we are about is about how does the state work. And our governments, some of them, Rwanda might be a bit of an exception, Ethiopia might be a bit of an exception, but many of our governments refuse to graduate to the level of saying we are about statecraft, which is when you make a decision, even about the continent, what is the end game? It's not about ideology. And I know even when we say Pan-African, look, Pan-Africanism cannot be, we cannot view it as a blanket which covers all our sins and says, but no. It needs to be practical. It needs to be felt by our people. So when I say we're past the ideology, is to say, if we don't graduate, we're going to find ourselves in a new era where other people are still running the continent. It might not be the French, it might not be the Americans, but it'll be other people who are simply here because they have said statecraft dictates that we need to be here and we need to extract. And if our governments don't wake up to that idea, it really is just a repeat of where we've been going wrong, which is we value ideology, but we don't value building of a state and institutions.
Is that why this question is going to have like 3 prongs to it, Prof? Is that why you find the Sahel region getting the kind of attention it has from the citizens? Has liberal democracy failed? And is the new scramble a threat to sovereignty? In terms of where does statecraft locate itself within these 3 prongs? There's things happening on the continent that are attracting quite a bit of attention from citizens, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso. And you see what is happening in French Africa in terms of liberal democracy. And of course, there's also the new scramble now that is happening. So the continent is caught up. Is that where statecraft needs more spotlighting, more attention?
100%. Because statecraft says, look, you deal with the cards that you've been given. We can't get away from the fact that, listen, many of the countries we mentioned, the UAE, the Russians, the Americans, all of them are here for a reason. It's not because they love us. There's no... They don't think we're magical human beings. There's no love. It's commerce. It's pure commerce.
Yeah.
So statecraft says, listen, yeah, we don't have to all like each other. I mean, the planet is big enough that we can all have our different worlds to it. But it does say, listen, when you deal with these countries, the term that I like from you, industrial sovereignty, how do you plan it, right? How do you make sure that you know what's coming out of the ground and you can calculate it and you can put a number to it? Right. That's what has made the Sahel Union so unique, where people are now looking at Captain Traore and I think also the Malian leader. The idea, because they've simply said something which many Africans feel, which is to say, why do our resources not work for us? And in the worst case, why do our resources work for France? Which makes absolutely no reason at all. I mean, I think if you look at the Niger issue, the uranium, because the French have for the longest been working on nuclear energy. That's the stability of their energy mix. It's the nuclear. What do you need for nuclear? You need uranium. Where have they been getting it free of charge in Niger?
Cents in Niger.
And cents. So it says, statecraft says, listen, you have this thing which you need, but you're taking cents and we're not even getting any value from it. So it makes all the sense in the inverted commas that statecraft says no, enough. What is that term they like to use in French about the post, like you say, it's not post-colonial the French, but it was a whole strategy of La République.
I wouldn't know.
Yeah, it was simply the French state. If you want to talk about statecraft in its coldness, they said, okay, you'll get liberation, but you will sign over your fiscal and your monetary policy to Paris. So many of these countries did not. Their reserves are not in their country; they're in Paris. And those who know accounting know that when you take something like that, how does Paris put it? Paris puts it on its ledger sheet as an asset.
Yeah. Do a double entry on it.
And how do you as a post-French state take it? Well, you don't have anything. And one of the things the student said to me yesterday, he said, listen, it means many of these countries don't have people who are trained in being able to do monetary and fiscal policy because they've never had to do it. The French have been doing it for them. That is a danger. Because if you as a state do not know how to create a budget and work around a budget, are you really a state? So when we speak about the idea of statecraft, it really is not about emotions. It's about simply saying, even if you have got the worst cards, which are played to you, what's happening in the Sahel region, you need to make a plan. This plan is not going to make everybody live in nirvana. It's not to say everyone's going to be rich, but it says it's your plan. It's your country's plan. It's what you want to do and how you move forward. And isn't that what you say? The idea of true independence is even if we make the mistakes, they are our mistakes, meaning we can rectify it.
Yeah.
And that's the whole idea about statecraft. And the Scramble is, look, it's a Scramble 2.0. And it's not going to be people coming on ships. It's going to be extractive.
Absolutely. And it's various forms of extraction, Prof. Pooe, because it's not just the extraction of what is on the ground, but it's also the extraction in what is between our two ears. So there's various forms of extraction. I mean, I made a comment on entertainment sport, which is a comment for another day. But let me return to this conversation and ask you this question. Your discussion of AI-driven financialization raises concerns about speculative economics and dependency. How does technological hype reshape economic decision-making in ways that quietly undermine state capacity in the global South?
Well, a good place to start is to say you go to Greenland and what happened in Venezuela, right? Those were not accidents. If you look at the advisors for President Trump, who has it been? President Trump, in his Trumpian way, fears no one except a few people, the oligarchs who come from Silicon Valley. Now, one of the things I looked at last year was, if you look at how these, these data centers operate. Data centers, how do I put it? They drain energy. They need energy and they need water. And they need critical raw minerals.
Yes.
And as you know, at the moment, those things, you need to get them very quickly. So when you go to Venezuela, people are looking at the oil. Look, oil is a substitute for energy. What Venezuela has is a lot of minerals. Greenland is minerals. So how does it, when you say the financialization is at its most grotesque form, at the political level, it means now the Americans will start looking around, sniffing around for where can they get these resources. And the one thing, look, the American army, for all its faults, it is still the American army. And as we found out, they can even kidnap presidents if they so feel. And I mean, with our president, sometimes they don't even need to kidnap them. They just give them money and they just turn over and start doing things. But the danger of it is at that level, which is at a security level, which is they can simply come in, make you sign contracts, which you know are wrong. But there's also at a danger level in terms of, and this is where maybe Africa is a bit shielded in the sense that we're not fully financialized as a continent. We are still at the bottom end of it. The Chinese understand it, but they have decided to do something a bit different, which I think maybe should be something I think you should follow up. Look at how the Chinese have decided to build their AI infrastructure and economy. They don't, yes, they've got the big animals, which the counterparts to Google and the like. They've got theirs in China. Here you think about the man who disappears, but he reappears in China again. The man from, I'm forgetting that big company in China.
Is that Alibaba?
Alibaba, right?
Yes.
They've got Alibaba. There's DeepSeek, right?
Yes.
But if you note how
there's
Huawei, they go for energy efficiency, which is to say they're not looking to build data centers that quench so much resources, right? So it's the western and it's the eastern part. Now, where it becomes a bit dangerous is if you look at the western part, it's pure speculation. Like at the moment, none of the Googles or the Alphabet, they are investing and giving valuation for companies that have just come on board. and the valuation is purely speculative. There is no numbers because this company has just been created. What they simply then do is they recycle people among themselves to say, Solomon used to work for Alphabet, and he used to work on a particular facet on Alphabet. He sets up his company, and he says, listen, my speculation is I can make the internet go faster by 0.555. What do these guys do? They put money now into it. Now, when you ask, like, okay, give me the actual engineering background to this, there's nothing. It's empty. It's pure speculation. This needs to be verified because I tried to do it this morning. But one of the economists I follow from the UK, she made a point of saying, look at what Google has done in the last 3 months. They actually went to go borrow money because they themselves are running out of money. Because they have so reinvested into this economy that they're now starting to borrow money. So to maybe kind of cap it and say, once you start to speculate and you put money on assets which are not real, but accept it as being you're speculating, what do you think is going to happen? Because isn't this how bubbles are created? Now, I'm not one of those people who's going to give you a prediction that in the year 2026, we're going to have a economic crash. No, I'm simply going to say, in the same way, when the Americans started to play around with derivatives for finance and they started to give people the ability, I mean, I'm sure that people have watched the movie that spoke about the crash when a stripper owned 5 mortgages or 5 bonds. You knew it was wrong because you're like, listen, finance is very logical. It's what you bring in and what you take out, and what's left behind is what we term is your asset. Now, if we just use that simple logic, and I understand those that know better will explain it, but if we use that simple logic to assess your Googles, your Metas, and the like, can we not all agree that this speculation is quite dangerous, and there has to be an accounting, what you guys reconcile, you have to reconcile the accounts eventually. It might not be this year, but eventually it needs to come up. And then the question that you ask for the Global South is to say, and this is where I think the Global South, especially the continent, it's both an opportunity and it's also a problem. We are consumers. We're not makers of products in this world. Even our digital content creators are not getting the proper due financialization that they should do. So maybe if you're a state out there, the question you need to be asking is, look, I always say this, we've got Africans who have been to Silicon Valley, they know these things. Why? The question should be, what can we create if we agree that a shift and a crash is coming? The question is, what comes afterwards? We can't get away from the fact that AI is useful in parts. It's an established fact, it's good. But what we need to ask is, what from AI is good for development? And if I'm an African country and I'm an African government, my worry is not the speculation. My worry is the question of saying, how should we think about what comes next? Such that we position ourselves for when the crash comes, we position ourselves as being able to finally be creative in this game. Because at this point in time, we're not creative. We're simple consumers. And what we need to be asking in the future is, when the crash comes, what's going to be left behind? And what is it that we should be thinking about? And that's how I think we as Africans should be thinking about it, and our government should be thinking about it. The speculation doesn't really involve us that much because you've seen the valuations of these companies. We don't have that type of money. What should worry us is what comes next, and how do we make decisions about making sure that because there's going to be a 2.0, in the same way there was the .com bubble, there's going to be a post.AI bubble. And this is where anticipatory governance and scenarios comes in. We're not saying that we're not getting into the issue of when and how the destruction happens. We're simply asking a question. Prepare yourself post it happening, such that we don't find ourselves in a situation when people speak about the new economy, we're still looking on the outside and saying, oh, look, we're just simply happy to upload the latest TikTok video, when we should be thinking, okay, how can we make that whatever thing circulate on the continent such that money stays on the continent and that we own those rights to ourselves? So maybe one of the things I would maybe also look at is, let's look at the laws and how we interpret AI in our countries. For instance, look, as a parent, I don't like my kids being on these things the whole day. Other countries are starting to say the same thing. So
yes,
what we
France,
should be thinking
Australia,
of,
passing
so
laws
where,
now.
so where are African governments to say the same thing? To say, listen, because remember, we've skipped a whole. We don't do the computer. Everything is on our smartphone. So we've skipped a whole stage. So, but we need to ask ourselves, what are our people consuming? Is it really I call it in the quest for development, or is it simple entertainment then we're not learning anything from? So maybe this is a chance where we can say, hey, you know what? We might not be able to speculate like those big numbers, but let's look at what's the impact on our country? What can we do better? Because we can't also, like, for instance, if we speak about new medical schools on the continent, a friend of mine was looking at Togo's healthcare system. Togo doesn't have the requisite amount of specialists in healthcare. Now, this is where AI is positive. If you are in Nigeria or South Africa and you've got very good medical schools, why can't you say, listen to the Togolese government, let's come to agreement, it's fine, it's financial. We will set up our medical schools there. Our specialists maybe might come in once a term or once a quarter, but in terms of teaching students, everything can be done on these platforms. So those are things we should be thinking. What's critical for what the financial speculation is for us not to be so invested in the debates about it. What's critical in this debate is what can we take from these, because some of them are good, and what can we use for development purposes? And I think what worries me is we're not in that debate. Our governments are not in that debate. We want to act as though we're also at the table to care what Google and Meta. Look, their numbers are they have nothing to do with us. What we should be asking is to say, when the crash happens, are we ready to make sure that we now say, listen, in this country, when you come in with these apps, we only want apps that help us advance our education and our system of understanding. If you're here for entertainment and creating things, you can strike a deal with Nollywood, and that's fine, but we're not in the game of just giving away our digital sovereignty for your entertainment. We need to move past that.
As we start to wrap our conversation, I'm still intrigued by statecraft, scenario planning, anticipatory governance. I'm not sure if I got it right. And whether these two are central to Agenda 63, whether they are central to SDGs, whether they are central to sovereignty, whether they are central to, I had another academic talk about the fact that what are we going to do with the youngest population in the world in 2040, 2050? Do we really have plans for them? So is that what is the answer to some of these questions, statecraft?
I would say yes. And I would say one of the things we need to do, and I know it's going to seem very counterfactual when I say it, is, look, the AU, Agenda 2063, it's good. It has made people view it. But one of the things we don't do enough, and the anticipatory governance kind of makes the point, is to say, what does it actually mean in the day-to-day life of an African, right? Because it's one thing, just because you give me a vision, that is not anticipatory governance or scenarios. That's a scenario. What we want to be able to do is to say, listen, if we speak about Agenda 2063, what does it mean for Nigeria at its most basic, for South Africa, at our local government, provincial or state government, and what does it eventually mean for the region? So my query and I think my frustration always with 2063 is it's a vision. It's a bit like South Africans and the NDP, National Development Plan. Vision, but it's an empty vision. It's a shell. Statecraft says, what are the mechanics that would make that happen, right? You spoke about the youngest population. Good. What does it actually look like in terms of employment, right? Have we actually thought, what are the industries of the future? We've just finished speaking about financial speculation. Now, what you tend to find sometimes with these agendas 2063, and even sometimes, because Nigeria had their own version of the development plan for 2030, but they just moved it out a bit because they knew they were not going to make it, is to say, you first need to say, what are the economies? Well, the first thing we need to ask is, what do we do well as a continent and what feeds us? Agriculture. Agriculture is the future. Now, this might not be agriculture of our forefathers where we're saying, this is where you might need to use technology. But the question needs to be, we need commercial agriculture. So the question then we then start to do with anticipatory governance to say, okay, who are the leaders in this field? Well, the Israelis, for all their bizarreness. They are great at technological agro-farming. The Americans, but we want more. We don't want genetically modified foods. We want healthy foods. So you start to look at it that way. And then you can actually say, listen, if we had to do this in X country on the continent, who leads in this? Well, Nigeria's sin is that they're so focused on oil that Nigeria is actually a very fertile country, exceptionally fertile, but they've not invested heavily enough in it. So when you speak about West Africa, I think what people really mean is West Africans who then try to find their way to Europe. It's to say, okay, listen, let's look at the leading potential areas of big farm for big farming for Africa. Well, Nigeria in West Africa would have to be one, maybe Ghana. And then when you start to look at, okay, are we going to farm what people have always done? No, the big thing in West Africa is cassava. And now the world is catching on to many of these things, right? Like rooibos and things. So when now you start to think about 2063 and statecraft, it's not an abstract thing. You're saying these are our assets. Let's invest in these assets.
Arable land.
Then you can arable land. And then you can actually make the speculation. Then is our education system speaking to that? Remember earlier on I said this idea that we're all going to go study political science and no. How many of our universities are set up in such a way that not that it's an agricultural college, no. It's an agricultural university which has the latest technology and is teaching us about the commerce of it. Because at the end of that, farming is commerce. And then you tend to find our universities, when it comes to agriculture, are not that advanced. We still call them colleges in many parts of the continent. So then you say, okay, you're fixing the education system. Now, meaning you've now created a pipe, right, which says, when we now have this youthful population, one of the areas which surely we can see is a future is agriculture. So we've ticked that off. So then you start to do the same for all the other sectors. Correct. And what I think should give us excitement is to say, when we do it well, yes, look, we'll always export even outside the continent. You have to do that because it's a fast way to get to raise up your reserves and get money in. But the key thing would be how now you return to the issue of integration in the continent. How now do we get how do we make sure that what we're making starts to sell in the continent? And now this is where you have to speak about financialization of the continent. But not financialization, which you're going to find the black rocks of the world coming in to speculate, because look, they've got nothing to lose, unlike us. We need to say, what type of financial institutions? Well, we need to look at our banks on the continent. They're very risk averse. They don't lend. This is where the state now needs to come in with policy, not to say recklessly lend.
Okay, what will our financial services look like? And what we need is a lot of risk. We need to invest in our young ideas, the young people's ideas or people's ideas about entrepreneurship. And this is where our banks on the continent have not been great. Sometimes they act like banks in the US, not even the US, because at least banks in the US, they were giving credit to their citizens. So this is one of the things we need to look at. And look, there's no 100% answer in terms of what the next industry is going to be. But for the continent, because of our basic need for infrastructure and heavy things, we need to give people the ability to make businesses that are going to invest heavily into the continent. Meaning we need a financial services sector that is open to risk. Not simply to say we want to listen to Basel 1, 2 for how our banks cannot work like European banks. Yes, they need to be liquid, but they need to be able to say, Solomon has an idea. Provided Solomon gives all the relevant paperwork, if it fails.
Physical evidence of maybe some land. I want to plow here. I want to plant this seeds. I want to purchase the seeds from here. I want to purchase this equipment. Some kind of, an agricultural bank of sort. Because I have, if I may just come in here, Prof, I have spoken to an academic from CSIR who is a geosensing scientist, and he talks about the potential of agriculture on the continent. And you've just spoken similarly along those lines in terms of agriculture is the future. So I'm thinking of a sensing scientist, a geosensing scientist, and a scenario planner having a conversation and talking to an agricultural lecture where agricultural practitioners or farmers can be in attendance and benefit directly and implement directly, which can then spur a lot of a movement into the future of food security on the continent.
Yeah, and it's critical. I used to live in Australia, and when I lived in Australia, one of the big things Australians were not happy with was the idea that I think it wasn't. I think it was the Chinese, or they were buying huge tracts of land in Australia for purposes of agriculture. A few years later, what's happening on the continent? Many of these countries are coming to buy agricultural land on the continent to send back to their country. So, yeah, there's something I think we're missing a trick about agriculture. And this is where maybe the idea of what is being fed to our generation about farming, because a lot of them think farming is, it's a dirty industry. It's not cool. And that's why I said sometimes statecraft dictates that you need to control the vision of what development looks like. And development is agriculture for the continent, because from it, we can, if we are fed and it's no longer an issue, then we can then move to other things. Because the future of the continent, look, and this is not one of those Pan-African dream. We have the ability, and it's not a far-off dream, to say that we can literally, we're open, we always trade with other countries. But in truth, we have the ability to literally be self-sustaining.
Yes.
And there's nothing wrong with
1.5 billion people can trade amongst themselves and be more than self-sustaining.
So then, which speaks then about, we need to, one of the assignments we did in class, I gave them a project to say, what does the harbor of the future look like on the continent? If you note that we don't have great harbors on the continent, that's why we've closed ourselves in. But one of the ideas that came up when discussing with students is say, look, when you think about a harbor, people automatically think about water. True. But if we had airports looking inwardly, acting as harbors for how we get goods across the continent at a quicker pace, you know that the horrible idea that it's cheaper for me to go to Europe than it is to travel in the continent. That is problematic.
That doesn't make sense.
That doesn't make sense.
Prof, let me move it, Nyana, and come and interject here a little bit. South Africa, you argue, is experiencing stability without renewal. What are the dangers of the doctrinal thinness, and how might it shape political and economic outcomes beyond 2026?
Yeah, I'll be quick with this one because it's as quick as the idea of the coalition in South Africa. We've sacrificed. People celebrate stability, but in them celebrating stability, there's no desire for return on investment. One, citizens didn't make this choice. It's one of the things which it's my bugbear when you speak about mainstream media in South Africa. They make it seem like citizens went to vote for a coalition. No. This thing it's a compact between the political elites and the parties. But what was broadcast is that we should be happy because if this didn't happen, supposedly we're going to be killing ourselves on the streets, which makes you always think, why do they always think we're going to go kill ourselves? But what has happened is that because this government, and I call it by its proper name, by political science term, it's a grand coalition. There's no such thing as a GNU. It's a grand coalition. So people get confused. So I can just clarify that. But there's nothing about the economy and moving forward. Everything is about, as long as there's stability, as long as there's there. But it's thin. It means nothing. South Africa's problems are well known. I always say you don't need a PhD for South Africa's problems. Everybody, if you're in a taxi, they can tell you what the problems are. But if you know what the conversation is about, it's not about development. It's not about rethinking the mistakes of the past of the economy. It's simply about, let's just live through stability. And that for me says it's thinness and it means nothing at all.
So in fact, you have also just mentioned something that I saw another political scientist commenting, but perhaps I'll leave that for the news. Let's come back into your research. You positioned the local government elections, again, I think this is in South Africa, as early warning system for national realignment. I just wanted to kind of go deeper on that. What should observers be paying attention to in 2026, 2027 local polls that might signal deeper political shifts towards 2034?
Well, key one, looking at the beautiful city of Joburg, if someone who is as dramatic and controversial as Ms. Zille is able to win the city of Joburg outright, it would mean that in the next elections, 2029 and 2034, the DA is going to be in a position where they will take over Gauteng as a province outright, because it would have meant that people have come to the realization, especially African people, Black people, have said, listen, the ANC does not work for us as a middle class, because that's still where the largest black middle class is in the country. So that's one thing. Two, it's also going to signal who the new leaders in 2034 of South Africa will be. If you look at places like parties like the DA, the ANC, and I know the ANC election is next year, but no, the truth would be the people you see who are going to be most prominent in these elections, local government elections, are most likely the people that are going to lead South Africa in 2034. Now, if that is then the case, we should then start asking the question, what do they look like? What do they believe? And what are they going to give to us going forward? So this is a good time to actually start asking people who will be standing to say, what do you believe in? What is your position on the continent? What is your position about what the economy of South Africa should be? If you find that they're simply empty drums and are only going to tell you the party rhetoric, we can then conservatively say that South Africa is in big problems for 2034. So that's what this, when I say it's an early warning system, that's what I mean. And I take this from what happened 10 years ago. I think it was the 2016 elections. The 2016 election was the first time the ANC lost the city of Joburg, lost the city of Tshwane. These were non-DA traditional places. City of Cape Town, they lost a long time ago, but they could always make sense of it to say, oh, well, look, the population doesn't look like the rest of the country. But when they lost the city of Joburg and the city of Tshwane, that almost set in time, the rolling ball started to roll to say they could actually lose power outright. So when the next elections came, the majority dropped in Gauteng. So I view these elections in the same way to say they're going to tell us what's going to happen with the ANC and with also the DA. By the way, it doesn't mean it's a positive story for the DA, because if they do not make means and to catch up and take over certain municipalities, it means South Africa is going to be a perpetual cycle of coalitions. And in as much as coalitions, people might extol their virtues, it also just means that people don't believe in the political elites we currently have. So there's also that counterfactual to it. So that's why I say it's an early warning system going forward.
Prof, we have almost wrapped up our conversation. Is there anything we left out that is keeping you awake in terms of your research into statecraft and policy for the continent? I want you to look at it from a continental point of view, and also just kind of look at it more going into the French Francophone Africa a little bit. In terms of their adoption, are there any movements there that signal some positive trajectory in adoption of statecraft as they congregate to speak about 2063?
Polygus c'est français. You want me to speak about the French? Look, for me, the key thing is there does need to be a shift on the continent away from the cancerous effects of France. France has been a huge cancer, and I think we need to better study and also think about what do we do with Francophone Africa. And I think of places like what happened in not Abidjan, but in Cote d'Ivoire. The fact that they are literally, that's one of the last strong points for France. They will fight hell to make sure that they keep it. But we need to ask the question, how long can this be? Especially as the French state is in total crisis as we speak. So maybe that's a chance and opportunity, because really we can't look, it's not a language thing. I mean, those who like French can like French, but it's a mentality thing. And it's not to say because we're Anglophone, it's better, but it's rather to say we need to find a common language of understanding on the continent, which again, I'm saying it's not a language thing. You can keep your language, but a common language of development. And we can't, as things currently stand, it's not healthy to have Francophone countries the way they are. It's a danger for themselves. It's also a danger for the rest of the continent. So that's one thing. And two, look, one of the things I'll be giving a chat on at Carleton University is, look, the idea of term limits on the continent, we need to come back to it a bit, because our governments and our policies work on a 5-year cycle. I used to work in government, and I can tell you, when it's a year of the election, nothing happens in the country. So one of the ideas I'm toying around is to say, and other countries have done it, and I know they haven't. Maybe what we should be saying is we give you a term of 7 years, meaning you have your stability. Maybe halfway we have a referendum to see if you're that bad, people should have a right to kick you out. But if you're able to do well, maybe we renew that 7 years, it becomes 14 years. So the issue is not how long you stay, it's what you are doing for the citizenry. It's not 100%, it's something, and it's an idea I'm still playing around with. But I think we need to really move away from the idea, as you said, not just liberal democracy, but the idea of saying we want development in return for service. And that should be the mantra going forward, which is, Solomon, if you're doing a great job, why should I worry that
which is measurable? Which is measurable, but shouldn't president have some KPIs that they talk to the citizens and say,
exactly.
If it's measurable, we throw in a referendum. Why are we throwing a referendum every 3 years? Maybe every year. Why are we doing it? Why don't we do it during end of years? Give us a report card instead of more promises. We just tell us about what has already happened.
Yeah, and I think it should also be tied to one of the things I'm tying to the term limit to is your salary. If you do well in the quarter,
like that.
And look, it's the best paid civil servant in the world is in Singapore, and they earn beautiful money. But when the state doesn't do well, the salary goes down. So at the end of the day, if you're asking someone to run a business for the continent and he has to face hardships, why can't we do the same for government when we are paying tax? Which we are paying through the through our loans. So those are the ideas a person is playing with at the moment.
Talk to final thoughts, Prof. Pooe. Talk to your students. Talk to someone in undergrad. Talk to someone that is going to access this podcast. Give some advice. Anything. Talk to your students. Just tell them what they should be paying attention to as they look into the new academic year, as they look into the future. Maybe they want to pursue a PhD or something. What should they be paying attention to?
Well, the key thing for me is let's do research that properly understands the problems of the continent. Yes, make no mistake, you can use well-banked data, you can use all those things, but the key question needs to be, is it helping my village, my city, and my town? And let's be brave in coming up with policy things which we might not see the value of it in our lifetime, but it should be something when people look back and say, you know what, when I read Solomon's work, he was right. That's why, look, if you look at people like late Kwame Nkrumah and the like, Busubukwe, we look at their ideas and revere them because even in 2026, we know that these ideas were solid and they were good. And also, look, it might be different from them. We should not be stuck in dogma. The future of the continent might look different to the way we have been historically been told about. Let's measure it in progress, and most importantly, let's agree the future needs to be based on commerce. We need to be able to feed ourselves. So when you come up with ideas and we do things in the classroom, don't just do it because it's a luxury. Let's really ask the key question, is it going to move our government and our people forward? Yeah, so that would just be my message.
Professor TK Pooe, thank you so much.